please introduce yourself to the jury?
Dr. Roberta Ballard.
Okay. Dr. Ballard, how are you currently employed?
I'm in private practice as a psychologist.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
Back in 2021, were you working with a forensic specialty group here in the state of Georgia?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us who that was?
There's a group, forensic psychology practice, based in Marietta, Georgia, called Forensic Specialty Group. And I started working with them, in early 2018.
Okay. And I believe you worked for them on a contract basis?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd been in private practice as a forensic and clinical psychologist since 2001 in Oregon, and then in 2017 I moved to Georgia and started working with Forensic Specialty Group.
When you worked with Forensic Specialty Group, can you describe the kind of things that you were contracted to do?
Sure. Similar to my work in Oregon, I would get referrals to do psychological evaluations of people who were somehow involved with the law, often criminal cases. So the referral would be a question of, are they competent to stand trial, or are they not guilty by reason of insanity? I also did civil cases, doing a psychological evaluation if someone was involved. Let's say they were involved in an accident and there was some trauma, things like that.
And what do you do now?
At this second, I'm practicing forensic psychology because I'm here, but in about 2022, I wanted a break from the forensic side of my practice, so I stopped taking new referrals and built up my therapy practice. I also always had a small therapy practice since 2001, so I wanted to pivot, so I started building up my therapy practice. So right now I'm just doing therapy.
Okay, and can you tell us where did you go to undergraduate school?
Did my undergraduate work at Occidental College. It's a liberal arts college in Los Angeles, California.
Okay, and what kind of degree did you get?
I got a bachelor's in political science.
Okay, and what year was that?
Oh my gosh, 1990.
99 or 90?
Bachelor's was 90.
Okay, all right, perfect. That's my miswriting. And then what did you do after that?
I went to graduate school at Kent State University in Ohio, and I started in 93. So from 90 to 93, I was in my early 20s.
So you went to Kent State University?
Yeah,
okay.
and got my PhD in clinical psychology, and graduated in 1999.
Okay, and then what did you do after that?
When you graduate with a PhD, you can't practice yet. You actually have to get supervised postdoctoral hours in order to get a license, and once you have your license, you can practice. So I did my postdoc in forensic psychology, also in Ohio, where I went to graduate school.
Okay, and that was Kent State University as well?
It wasn't. It was the Summit County Courthouse Psychodiagnostic Clinic in Akron, Ohio.
But you received your Psy doctorate from...
Oh, my PhD I received from Kent State University.
Okay, but you did your postdoc work at the Summit Clinic?
Yeah, I did my postdoc work in Akron, which is like 20 minutes from Kent.
Gotcha. Right. Do you currently hold any licenses or certifications?
Yeah, I'm licensed in psychology in Georgia and North Carolina, and then I have a certification called PsyPact, which, do you want me to describe it? Because it's not...
Sure.
It's not particularly relevant here, but states have, 40 of the 50 states have this agreement where if you're a licensed psychologist in one of those states, you can practice online therapy with clients in any of those other PsyPact states. So I have a PsyPact credential, which means that I can do online therapy with someone who lives in another PsyPact state. So I have clients who live in like Minnesota and Utah.
So, telehealth type thing?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So even though you may live in another state, you can work with clients in another state. It's just kind of a reciprocity type thing?
Exactly. Yeah. It was something that it's existed long before the pandemic, just to make interjurisdictional telehealth more accessible to people. But it has kind of caught on since the pandemic. I think it went from like 20-something states had passed those laws, and now it's 40, because there's just more of a need.
So let's talk a little bit about your professional experience. I'm going to test your memory from going back into the 90s.
I'm ready.
All right. Can you tell us what your first job in psychology was as a trainee?
I don't have my CV in front of me.
Would you like me to?
With my license or before I got licensed?
Before you got licensed.
Before I got licensed, I had my postdoc, and then I moved to Oregon because my husband at the time was also getting his PhD in psychology, and he was doing his internship in Oregon. So moved to Oregon, and I wasn't licensed yet in Oregon. So until I got licensed, I worked at a community mental health center, and I worked in their older adult services. I supervised a locked unit of a nursing home for people who had serious, severe mental illnesses and medical problems that required a nursing home level of care. And I also did assessments of older adults in the community, where I would drive to their homes and do psychological assessments for older adults who didn't have reliable transportation, and some therapy that way too. And once I got my license that was in about 2000. And then once I got my license in 2001, I joined, do you want me to just keep going about my career? Okay.
Yeah.
I joined a private practice called Wildwood Psychiatric Resource Center. Actually, when I joined it, it was called Women's Psychiatric Resource Center, but they changed their name at some point because they were serving everybody. And that was a group private practice of psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers who, it was a traditional office with therapy offices, and we saw therapy clients. And then in addition to that, I also started building a forensic practice in Oregon.
All right, so how many years overall have you been doing forensic evaluations?
Including my postdoc since 1999, so is that 25 years? As a licensed psychologist, not as a supervised postdoc, 23 years.
Okay. Are you currently a member of any professional associations?
I'm not. I'm usually a member of the state association, like Georgia Psychological Association, and the American Psych, and I let them lapse because I just never use them. I use a separate liability insurance and everything, so I just kind of let them lapse.
Okay, but you still maintain your license and certification in the state of Georgia?
Yes, yeah. The license is required to practice. Also, my husband's a psychologist, and he's a member, and so I get all the publications and stuff.
From him?
So
Okay.
I know I should be a member.
That's fine. Tell me about some of the additional education or trainings that you've received with respect to forensic psychology.
To maintain your license, like a lot of professions, you have to do continuing education to renew your license. And so the continuing education that I've done over the years has been mostly forensic and some therapy. So I've, again, I don't have my CV in front of me, but there's an association called the American Association of Forensic Psychology that, in my opinion, they do the best continuing education in forensic psychology. So I've been to their workshops all over, they'll hold them in different cities, and I'll travel to a city just to do the workshops because they're really valuable. So.
Okay, since you have been licensed, approximately how many overall psychological evaluations do you think you've completed?
That I don't know. It's in the hundreds. I don't know if it's in the thousands. If I do 2 a week, that's 100 a year for 20 years. Yeah, hundreds.
All right, approximately how many competency to stand trial evaluations do you think you've completed?
Hundreds.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about criminal responsibility evaluations?
Not as many, because it's not as common of a referral question. Competency evaluations are the most common referral question. So, I mean, over 100, yeah.
All right. How many times do you think you've testified in any type of court proceeding?
I don't know how many times in anything, including like civil and
Sure.
family court and everything. Oh, dozens.
Okay. Does
Yeah.
it still make you nervous?
A little bit.
Okay.
Not as much. In the beginning of my career, it felt like a really big deal, and now it just feels like part of my job.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you are being hired for these forensic evaluations, what is the purpose of those evaluations? What do you think your role is in being the evaluator?
My role is to answer the referral question. So if it's a referral question of, was this person competent? Is this person currently competent to stand trial? I'm doing a psychological evaluation to render an opinion about whether they understand what's going on in court right now. My role is to educate the trier of fact, which is you all, about mental illness and whatever like relevant diagnoses and stuff.
Okay, so essentially you're not being hired to be anybody's particular advocate, correct? Your job is to conduct the evaluation and offer your opinion.
Right, yeah. That's an important distinction with, it doesn't matter what side hires me in terms of, I do the same evaluation. And it just, there's an evaluation I do to answer a question. I'm not hired to like help someone win a case. I'm hired to give my professional opinion.
Okay. At this time, I would move to tender Dr. Ballard as an expert in the fields of clinical and forensic psychology.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So this jury has previously heard Dr. Garrett testify. So I'm going to ask some follow-up questions about forensic psychological evaluations
Sure.
in general. Okay. So what I think you've already touched on it, but what is the purpose of that particular evaluation?
Of an NGRI, of a not guilty by reason of insanity evaluation?
Yes, or competency. Yep.
Okay. I mean, the purpose of those are different. So should I
You
talk
can touch on
about
both of
this
them
one?
since it's part of what you do. So
Yeah. I didn't do a competency evaluation in this case. But the purpose with competency is to figure out if the defendant is currently, their mental status currently, if they can work with their attorney, understand the charges against them, assist in their defense. There are forensic assessment instruments that have been developed to help us to do that. They're not required. You can just do like a really in-depth interview. Sometimes it's really clear that someone's not competent to stand trial. Like if they come in to talk to you and they're really psychotic and don't even know who you are and are really out of touch with reality, it's pretty clear that they can't be competent to stand trial. Other times it's not as clear because they might understand that they're charged with something and they understand that there's a court proceeding and who what a jury is and what a judge is. But they might have underlying delusions and stuff that would affect their ability to like rationally understand the trial. So the purpose of the evaluation is just to assist the court in figuring out if this person is competent to stand trial. And then with a sanity, don't just
Go, you need to go, yeah.
it's mental status at the time of the offense is the phrase, or NGRI, not guilty by reason of insanity. And that looks more not at how the person's doing right now at the time of the trial. It doesn't look at that really at all. It looks at what their mental health and mental status was at the time of the offense to understand better if there were mental health issues going on when the alleged crime occurred. And so the evaluation will rely always, or almost always, partly on an interview with the defendant, but not only on that. That's one piece of information, but there are lots of pieces of information to take into account, like witness statements, police records, medical records, interviews with family members, trying to just get a whole picture of what the mental health was of the defendant when the alleged crime happened.
Generally speaking, how do you come to be involved in a criminal type case?
Like practically speaking?
Yeah, I mean, so we have already heard from Dr. Garrett, and she's employed by the Department of Behavioral
Yeah.
Health. So, based on where you work, how
Okay.
do you become involved in
Yeah.
it?
I've become involved, someone had an attorney contacts Forensic Specialty Group. Someone calls them back. It's either the office manager, or when we don't have an office manager, it's Kevin, the owner. And the attorney says, I need an evaluation for a client of mine, and they chat, and it gets assigned to one of the psychologists who works in the practice. There's not a particular like rhyme or reason necessarily to who gets what case. Sometimes it's as simple as, like, this is in Cherokee County, and at the time that we received this referral, I lived in Cherokee County, so it might have just been like, it'll be easier for Bobbi, like Dr. Ballard, I go by Bobbi a lot, to get to the Cherokee County Jail. So it's, we're all like qualified to do an insanity evaluation. So, you know, I was, you know, this showed up on my calendar.
Okay. And you, based on just the nature of that practice, you are primarily hired by defense, correct?
Yeah, things work differently in different states. Like when I was at that court clinic in my postdoc in Ohio, all forensic evaluations, whether they came from the prosecution or the defense or the judge, just went to this clinic that I worked in. And so, I mean, a lot of time, I mean, I would know who had sent the referral, but I didn't pay a lot of attention because it didn't matter. And then in Oregon and in Georgia, when the state hires an expert, they usually just use someone who works at DB, I always get the initials wrong.
DBHDD?
DBHDD, thank you. Because, I mean, it's more efficient because they're a state employee and they're on salary, and it's, yeah. And so I think the state just, in Oregon, I can only speak to the states I've worked in, Oregon and Georgia, the states just don't hire private practice persons, or so rarely that like our phone just doesn't get calls from the state for evaluations. So it's the defense who needs people, hires people in private practice. Yeah.
Okay, so based on just how the roles are kind of set up here
Yeah.
in Georgia, that you're the primary contracting people with that group tends to be defense attorneys.
Yeah, and it's different even criminal versus non-criminal. Like I did civil work, and I was hired by the plaintiff and defense, you know, all the time because it wasn't set up that way in the civil court the way it was in criminal. And same with I did parental capacity evaluations, and I would get hired by the state, which was DFACS, or in Oregon it's called DHS, and by private attorneys who were representing parents who were involved. So yeah, when it's possible, both sides hire us, and it just doesn't happen with the way that the system is set up.
But you've done, I understand your testimony to be, is that you've done evaluations for governmental agencies as well?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and in federal court too, it was set up differently. So I've done some state some federal criminal evaluations where I worked on the state side and on the defense side. So.
Okay. Do you recall up until this date how much the defense has paid you for your work?
So far, the defense, or the state, indigent defense, the state has paid me for whatever this 2021 evaluation was. I don't recall how much it was, but it was however many hours I spent on the evaluation in 2021, and then there'll be a second invoice for whatever time I'm here today for this trial.
So if you were paid $2,500 for your initial work, does that sound about right?
That sounds about right. That's about 10 hours.
Okay, and then so what you are here for today is obviously your testimony, which you will be paid based on your actual work involved in that and your testimony.
Yeah,
here
whatever
today.
hours I spend on this, and some travel expenses because I've since moved to North Carolina.
Does that have any effect on why you're here today?
What, the move?
No, ma'am.
Oh.
You haven't been promised a certain particular amount of money for your testimony, correct?
Correct. No,
Just
I'm
for-
paid for time, not for like an opinion.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. So you were assigned this, I think you said it appeared on your calendar.
Yeah.
And then can you tell us a little bit about the steps you took when you first received this case?
Yeah. I saw that it was on my calendar. I don't remember if I either called you or emailed you to find out about the case and to let you know I was the one who'd be doing it, and to get records to review before I went to evaluate Chloe, and also to let you know when I could schedule to see her. And then at some point I would get the records. It was all like online. There weren't any hard paper records. It was all like Dropbox electronic records. I don't remember the question.
And that's okay. So the things you did. So your first
Yeah.
steps were reaching out to contact me to kind of find out what the nature of the question was?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I think you've already told us that the request wasn't for a competency evaluation,
Right.
correct? Do you remember approximately when in 2021 you first received this referral, or that, do you remember what month it was?
I don't. It was probably in February of 2021, maybe January or February. I saw her first in late March, and just knowing that my schedule, I usually had to kind of schedule things a little ways out. At the latest, it would have been the beginning of March.
Okay, so it appears on our calendar, you start doing your investigation, you
Yeah.
schedule, and then you set that time frame out when you're gonna go and meet with her.
Yeah.
But leading up to that, you're doing all these things in the background to prepare for that, correct?
Reading whatever records that I have access to at that point, and and scheduling with the jail to do an evaluation.
At that particular point in time, do you recall what sources of information you had available? I know you said it was a Dropbox, so that probably meant it was a lot of.
I don't remember what parts of the records were Dropbox and what wasn't, and exactly how much I had. I know at the bare minimum before I went to see her, I would have had like the indictment and the initial police reports. I don't remember if I had more than that before I went to see her. I would have had just enough to know kind of the basics of the case and what the charges were.
So you receiving things like the police reports or police videos or that kind of thing
Yeah,
is
discovery.
Discovery. So you had that available to you prior to going out.
Yes.
Okay. And do you specifically recall what you may have reviewed prior to that, or going out there?
Before seeing her, I would have reviewed whatever I had at that point, but I don't remember exactly what I had.
Okay. And what is the reason for reviewing those things prior to going out to see Ms. Driver? What are you trying to get an understanding of?
Trying to get to generate theories, as many theories as possible, generate hypotheses to test when I saw her. Some common theories when doing a forensic evaluation are, this person might have a mental illness. This person might not have a mental illness. This person might be attempting to fake a mental illness. They're just different theories to test. So I'm just...
So you would have already in your mind kind of had some things that you were going to go out and look for when you met with Ms. Driver at the jail.
Right.
Okay. And you indicated that you went down there the end of March of 2021. Do you recall specifically what date that was?
The 29th.
Okay. And do you recall on that day how long you spent with her?
Not exactly. It was at least a couple hours.
Okay. All right. And when you, and then you went out again a second time?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall the date of that?
June 12th.
All right. And do you recall how long you were out there that particular time?
Again, I don't, but it was at least a couple of hours.
Okay. Let's talk about the steps of your evaluation process with Ms. Driver, okay?
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you generally start these particular evaluations with the defendant?
I start by talking about, by obtaining informed consent. And what that means is reviewing with her kind of the nature and purpose of the evaluation, and letting her know what the nature of our evaluation relationship is, because it's sometimes people hear that, you know, you're a psychologist and they think that you're their therapist. So it's important in a forensic evaluation to clarify that this isn't a doctor-patient relationship. There are limits to confidentiality. So I let her know that because I had been hired by her defense counsel, that I would share with her defense attorneys anything, you know, that I learned, but that if I wrote up a report that was shared with the court, that it would be shared with the whole court, shared with everything, so that anything she talked about might end up being things that I would write about or testify about. I let her know her participation is not voluntary. She's not required to participate, and she was just told that she could consult with her attorney at any time, and give someone an opportunity to ask questions about all of that, and see if they agree. And there's a written form, and they sign it. And so that's the beginning of the evaluation, is kind of setting the parameters for like what my role is.
Do you recall what her general appearance was when you met with her at the end of March of 2021? Let me refresh my memory.
The only picture I'd seen of her before I met her was a booking photo, and when she came into the room, I didn't recognize her, and I thought they might have brought me the wrong person, but it turned out that she had, the booking photo, looked really thin, and she'd gained some weight. It'd been about 3 months she'd been in jail, and she'd gained some weight in jail. So, so she looked healthy. She looked, you know, pretty. She was dressed in standard jail attire. There was nothing really like extraordinary about her hair or anything. She just looked kind of normal.
Do you recall if she was medicated at that time?
At the time, although I'm not sure if she was taking it, but at the time she was prescribed Prozac, which is an antidepressant, and Zyprexa, which is an antipsychotic.
Okay. At any point during that initial step of your informed consent or anything, did you ever provide Ms. Driver with what the legal definition of insanity was?
No. When I talk about like the nature and purpose of the evaluation, I'm really broad. I don't even really vary it between different types of evaluation. I say it something like, I'm here to find out if there are issues around your mental health that are relevant to your case. Like, it's pretty general.
Did she seem to indicate that she had any understanding of what that legal definition was based on your conversations with her?
No.
Okay. Did you ever get a sense in your interview with Ms. Driver that she was answering your questions in a specific way or to try to achieve a particular result?
No.
All right. What was one of the, I think what you've already talked about, one of the first things you're going to do is background information with the defendant. Can you tell us about what some of the background information that you obtained about Ms. Driver that you thought was relevant to your inquiry?
Sure. She said that she had been kind of a hard-to-handle kid. That hard to handle was her words, and that she did okay in school. She didn't have any like learning problems or anything, but that she left early because she was like acting out a lot, and she called herself boy crazy. But she said she was, just not going to school and skipping and just hanging out with peers, and had started to experiment with drugs. her parents, she said that it was hard. She and her parents didn't get along, so they had even agreed to let her live with a boyfriend in another state for a while, but that didn't work out, so she moved back home. So she said, particularly starting around adolescence, that she was kind of unstable, and then she also reported some mental health. I know we didn't get there yet, but some mental health things started to crop up around that time too.
And what were those mental health things that she brought up to you?
Mood issues, like depressed mood, and also really energetic, agitated mood, and also a lot of anxiety, some self-harm, like superficially cutting her wrists. She had at least one attempt where she took an overdose of pills in middle school. And she started at about in her mid-teens, she started to have some paranoid ideation, some paranoid feelings around thinking, and also just some delusional thinking, like believing she could hear other people's thoughts, believing that people were conspiring against her.
So that started back in her teens?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. What did she describe to you as about her employment history?
Not a real significant employment history. Let's see if I don't think I even included a section for it.
On page 3. Page 3?
Page 3. She'd reported she'd been with Mr. Joyce since she was 17, and that he prohibited her from working. And in the fall of 2018, he let her get a job, is how she said it, because they didn't have any money. But otherwise, she didn't have an employment history.
Okay. And you also covered medical history and substance abuse history, is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And what do you recall regarding the substance abuse history?
She said that she started smoking marijuana when she was 12, and she was doing it initially to help with anxiety. And when she was 16, a boyfriend introduced her to cocaine, and she tried cocaine, but she preferred alcohol and marijuana. She also tried LSD in high school, and I think that was all that she reported to me.
Okay.
Until some oral CBD in 2020, in the months leading up to her charges.
Okay. So the only thing that stood out in your mind was the stuff that she had previously done in her early teens, and that and then was reported with respect to the CBD?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And let's talk about her relationship history with you. My understanding is that her really primary and only relationship was with Mr. Joyce, correct?
Long term, yes. Before that, from age 13 to 16, she said she had a lot of boyfriends, but I don't know how, they weren't long-term serious relationships. And then when she was 16, she met Mr. Joyce, and when she was 17, she started a relationship with him.
Okay. And do you recall the age difference between the two of them?
Yeah, she was 16 and he was 38 when they met, and he approached her at a bus station and was telling her some spiritual things that really she found intriguing, because she had been wondering about spirituality, and somehow they exchanged contact information, and she reached out to him later.
What did she tell you about their particular lifestyle and about having multiple wives, and how she kind of conceptualized that whole thing?
Yeah, she said she joined him as his wife, even though they weren't legally married, and that she explained to me that he believed in having multiple wives, and the way she said it is that he made it make sense to me. Like, he explained it to her in a way that she accepted it. And her job, it wasn't a paid job, but her job was to try to recruit other women to join them as wives.
And prior to meeting Mr. Joyce, you indicated that none of her relationships had been anywhere like that before, correct?
Right.
All right.
Yeah, they'd been like with age-appropriate people.
And that it was Mr. Joyce who introduced this other lifestyle to her and explained
Yes.
it to.
Yes.
And she specifically told you that the way he explained it just made sense?
Yeah, there were a lot of things that he, quote unquote, taught her. She said he saw his role as leading young women as his wives in this world. It's very confusing. This world of there are 160-something thousand real people, and I guess they were some of them, and they needed to be secluded from society. We're calling this a lifestyle, but actually it was a cult, and he was or is the cult leader, and she was a member.
Okay. So let's talk about what Ms. Driver reported to you in regards to her pregnancy. Can you tell us what you identified as being important with respect to that?
Yeah. She said she got pregnant in early 2019, and that before that, she and the other wives and him were living a nomadic lifestyle, and sometimes living out of a car or an RV or at friends' houses. And, well, I mean, actually that continued even when she was pregnant. But during the pregnancy, it sounds like that was the first time that she was kind of pushing back against any of these things she was being taught by him, because he wouldn't let her get prenatal care. He wouldn't let her go to a hospital. She had one ultrasound apparently, but otherwise no medical care. He did not want her to go to a hospital when she was in labor, but they had to go because her water had broken, but she wasn't progressing. And after she had their daughter, he made her leave against medical advice after 12 hours because the staff at the hospital were talking about calling Child Protective Services because of I don't know exactly why, actually. I can't speak to exactly why.
But they ended up leaving the hospital?
Yeah.
For her report?
Yeah, he referred to them as a satanic hospital when they left. And she didn't want to because she still felt like she wasn't physically ready, and she still had questions about breastfeeding, and yeah, she didn't want to go.
What did she tell you about how Hannah came to be named? Do you recall?
She said that he chose the name Hannah, but then also chose the nickname for Hannah, Nimsy, and said that it was short for Nimza Kazina, which I don't know if it's accurate or not, but Ms. Driver started to believe that that long name translated into I'm Sin. They called her Nimsy, I think, more than Hannah.
Okay, and so one of the first things that Ms. Driver indicated to you that kind of raised a little bit of a red flag was associating the nickname Nimsy with I'm Sin?
Yeah, and it was part of a bigger delusional belief system around the idea that she, and by extension her daughter, were sinful because she wasn't legally his wife, and so she was sinning, and that her daughter had been born into sin. And so there was this sort of ongoing different delusions all around that idea that they were sinful.
Okay.
And that at times when she expressed those fears to Mr. Joyce, that he would reinforce them, that they were accurate.
Okay. Can you describe to us what Ms. Driver told you about their overall relationship, like from the beginning to the end?
Yeah. I saw her a few months after the death of her daughter. And she had very mixed feelings. And I don't think she would have reported them as mixed. I think sometimes she felt really positively about him, and sometimes she felt really negatively about him. It was kind of one or the other. When she spoke about him positively, she said, he's the smartest person I've ever met. He's amazing. He's gorgeous. He looks like Jesus Christ. He taught her so many things about how the world works that she didn't know. And he believed he was the Messiah, and she, had believed that too. So all of these sort of really positive feelings she had about him. Also just felt like sometimes he could be really affectionate and positive towards her, which I found out later is accurate because I listened to a lot of recorded phone calls that they had in jail, and that sometimes he could be really sweet. And then when she was in the other headspace, she said, I talk to people now and they say it sounded like a cult, and I think, I think maybe it wasn't a cult, and they say that he abused me, and maybe it was abuse. I didn't think it was abuse. I think that I deserved it, or I think that he was teaching me a lesson. So, she was confused.
And it sounds like she had very limited insight into it.
She had limited insight, and it's also kind of a typical insight for an abusive relationship and for a cult member. There's this theory called trauma bonding, where emotional bonds grow out of a cycle of abuse. Because even in an abusive relationship, there are periods that are really rewarding, and then there are periods of punishment or abuse. And there's a power imbalance. So the person who doesn't have the power becomes very bonded to this person who sometimes treats them really well. And so by the end of that first time I met with her, one of my theories was that there was this trauma bonding going on.
Okay. Did she describe his relationship to you as controlling and in any way, or were you told what that all entailed?
She described it as controlling. So did lots of other people in witness statements, and I would describe it as controlling and listen to conversations, very controlling. But yeah, she said he controlled her food, he controlled her ability to communicate with others, which was basically she was only allowed to communicate with others if she was trying to recruit a woman to their group, where she could go, when she could have her phone or not, checked her phone, when she could talk to her parents, which sounds like his preference would have been never, but sometimes she could talk to her parents, but he was always there monitoring it. Or if he found out that she contacted them without him knowing, then that was something that she would be punished for. And that's a really typical abusive thing, is to isolate the victim. he wouldn't call her Chloe, he called her Kwani. He chose that name and told her that was her name. Yeah, he controlled her email, he controlled her access to social media. And all of this was kind of presented as being for the greater good and for this, whatever purpose, greater purpose that they had, that she was to submit to these things because for some bigger purpose.
You indicated that she was talking about some of these things as buying into it because that's what he was selling, or he made sense.
Right, yeah. And for a while, it did make sense to her, and she didn't perceive things as abusive. And it was after she became a mother that it was harder for her to buy into everything, because there were things that she wanted to do as a mother that she wasn't allowed to do.
Did she kind of express to you in any way that she was made to feel that those rules or that control was for the purpose of, or that she deserved it?
Yeah, that was actually the word that she used, that she thought she deserved it. She thought, like I said, he reinforced that idea that if anything bad was happening to her, she was being locked in a dark room or told not to move for a long period of time or hit or anything, that it was because she deserved that.
Okay. One of the other areas that you spoke with Ms. Driver about was bad CBD use, correct?
Correct.
All right. And what do you recall her report to you about that CBD?
In late 2020, when she was starting to feel more unstable and have more delusions, she wanted to take some CBD because she thought it would help calm her down and feel less anxious. And she felt like one small dose a day helped her. But then she said he started giving her big doses 3 times a day. And she said she didn't want that much, and he said she should take it, and he kept giving it to her and standing next to her and making sure that she took it. She felt like it was too much, and then it made her more paranoid. I don't know if it was, or if she was just becoming more paranoid because of her mental illness. I don't know, but regardless, she was involuntarily taking higher doses than she wanted to.
Okay. And we talked a little bit about the abuse, but can you kind of explain to you some of the actual incidents of physical abuse that she reported to you and how she viewed that?
Sure. Well, like I said earlier in the relationship, she said that she didn't feel abused earlier in the relationship. She felt like he was helping her out, that he was doing it for a good purpose. She said he slapped her a couple times earlier in the relationship, but he never left marks on her until October 2020, when he really, she said, bashed my face, but punched her in the face. She was upset that, she said she wasn't upset that he punched her or hurt her. She was upset because he did it in front of their daughter, and it was upsetting to her. She was, she didn't want her daughter to witness that. So she was already feeling like she deserved to be hit. She was sin and had committed sin and deserved to be punished. But because her daughter saw it and that was upsetting, that was when she wanted to get to her parents' house with her daughter.
So there were, at least in her mind, some signs that she was kind of responsible for all the sin in the world and just taking that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And she would describe him as, didn't describe him as controlling or abusive at first, but described things that were inconsistent with that representation.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of her description of the relationship with him, she did not describe it as abusive or controlling.
She didn't see it as abusive or controlling early on. When she was talking to me about it, she was sometimes talking about it like it had been really great, and sometimes talking about it like, I think he was abusive, or so she was, like I said, sort of two minds and really confused and still like kind of bonded to him, but then also questioning it. So. And
without telling me anything about what Mr. Joyce might have said to Ms. Driver that she told to you, were there some of those things that she certainly is actively questioning in that relationship?
Yes.
Okay. Did she appear, when you were talking to her about her relationship with Mr. Joyce, really struggle with how that relationship either physically ended or where they were at that particular point in time?
In December?
No,
or?
When you were meeting with her,
Yeah.
you said that she had been talking both positive and negative. Can you describe how did you see that as struggling, or how with that?
Yeah, in fact, she told me that she'd had several phone calls while she was in jail with him, but then like people found out and it was stopped. And she said she missed him, but she's confused, is what she told me. And she doesn't know, like she used to think God wanted her to be with him, but now she wasn't sure if God wanted her to be with him. And she said, I think I love him, but I don't know. Like she was confused.
Okay. So she was kind of struggling with that physical separation and emotional separation.
Yeah, yeah. There's levels here. I mean, if we just look at it as an abusive relationship, she was struggling to get away from someone that she'd bonded with in an abusive relationship. But then there's the level of this organization, this cult, that she was struggling with the idea of maybe all that wasn't true. Maybe this greater purpose is, just, not accurate.
Okay. And we'll touch base on, with respect to, we'll go back to those jail phone calls later,
Okay.
and how you came to talk about that. Let's talk about the mental status exam that you conducted when you
Sure.
first met with her. Now, you would have done that on both occasions, correct?
Right.
Okay. And the purpose of that is what?
It's to get an idea of how that person is doing, like at that moment. What their mood is, what their expression, like their expressed emotion is, how their thoughts are working, like are they rational, are they not rational, are they organized or not, just to get a sense of their mental status.
Okay. And do you recall anything significant about what you were able to determine about her mood or affect at that time?
Yeah, both times I saw her mood and affect were pretty much within normal limits, with some exception. She was like a little bit elevated sometimes, and by elevated I mean like a little bit energetic, or really like quick to like look incredibly joyful, and yeah, just a little like more energy. I understand from like reading other reports and reading records that she has been depressed many times, but when I saw her, she didn't seem depressed either time.
Okay.
And that's consistent even with reviewing the jail medical records, that she kind of went in and out of some depression and some mania or hypomania.
And so she reported to you kind of some of those same similar depression type symptoms too, correct? And they were still working on adjusting her medications and... Yeah,
she said her mood was a little better recently because she'd started on some Prozac, which is an antidepressant. So when I saw her, I guess it makes sense she wasn't depressed because she had started on some medication.
Okay. And one of the things you kind of are there to assess is whether or not, or to flush out whether or not they are still potentially experiencing auditory or visual hallucinations, correct?
Right,
okay.
right.
And what did you note about that in that particular interview?
Yeah. it's not possible to tell just by looking at someone if they're having auditory or visual hallucinations. Sometimes you kind of can, but you can't know for sure because someone could just be sitting still and hearing and seeing all kinds of things. She didn't look like she was experiencing any hallucinations, hearing or seeing things. I also just asked directly if she said she wasn't at that time experiencing anything. She was very talkative, and that's what I mean by that elevated thing. Like she was, talking a little bit fast and a lot of words. She didn't seem paranoid or suspicious. If anything, she was really open. There was some pretty significant, like bizarre content in her speech, some magical thinking and some kind of just bizarre ideas and some delusions of reference. So even though she wasn't like disorganized or distressed from any like psychotic, disordered thoughts, she had some sort of delusional thinking. One of them is she said she recently became concerned that she caused COVID because the word COVID starts with C and ends with D, and her initials are CD. So that would be an example of a delusion of reference. It has nothing to do with her, but she's like imbued it with some kind of potential meaning and gotten really kind of paranoid that she's hurt a bunch of people, which is again consistent with the previous delusions that she's had. So she was, she appeared pretty stable, but with some, psychotic stuff going on.
Okay, and that was even after she had been incarcerated for some time and was no longer on the CBD, those symptoms were still present?
Right, yeah, this was a few months later.
All right. What were some of the things that you were able to find out from Ms. Driver about her history of that paranoia or hallucinations?
She, similar to the COVID thing that she told me about, the CD thing, she said that in the past she's often felt like she's evil and she's the cause of bad things in the world. She also just reported other hallucinations, thinking that bonfires are talking to her, thinking that trees are talking to her, believing that everyone can read everybody's thoughts, and feeling that everyone is against her. Those are all things that she'd reported experiencing, not at the moment when I saw her, but in the past.
Okay. And then when you are doing your the status examination, you also talked to her in great length of everything that kind of led up to December 8th of 2020, correct?
Right.
All right. What did she describe to you as some of the things that she was enduring during the fall of 2020?
She said fall of 2020, she was getting worse over time. And she was having a lot of paranoid thoughts and a belief that the world hated her. She said that her paranoia was getting worse and worse over time, and the worst period it was the 2 weeks leading up to and including December 8th. She felt like the people that she was staying with, which was Mr. Joyce and his other 2 wives, were all against her, that they hated her. She thought maybe her parents hated her. She was worried people were plotting against her. She was just struggling with a lot of, like, there's a word we use, decompensating, but it just means like declining or getting worse. Like she was decompensating over time. She was getting worse over time.
Okay, and what does it mean to for somebody with these type of symptoms to express that they have like a heightened sense of awareness to things that are around them? Like, what does that mean?
It could mean a lot of things, but she told me that she believed she had this heightened awareness of things around her. And the way she described it to me is part of that. She could hear other people's thoughts, or she could cause other people, like she was, I'm not even sure how to explain it because it's not rational, but that she was really more like sensitive to other people's thoughts and feelings, and they affected her.
Does that feed into some of those delusions of reference that you're talking about, like thinking that things have a different meaning?
Feeds into delusional references. It feeds into her problems with having a stable sense of identity. That people with psychotic disorders, people with schizophrenic disorders, really struggle to feel like, to know the boundaries, like where they end and where other people begin. It's very confusing because their thoughts are literally disordered. And so the heightened awareness could relate to this kind of not knowing the boundaries of where she ends and where other people begin, where her responsibility ends. Is it the whole world? Is it, the people, like, all of that was very confusing to her.
Okay. And you also discussed with her what happened in November of 2020 with her daughter, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then in the weeks leading up to this, what other things were going on with Miss Driver that you think are notable about, or that contributed to the decompensation of her mental state?
The black eye, when she was hit in October, that was one of the things that like kind of added to decompensating. She had called her parents to get them to pick her and the baby up, but Mr. Joyce took the baby, and so she went to her parents alone and returned because she felt like she'd never see her daughter again if she didn't go back. That was really stressful. She also reported that she wasn't sleeping much at all. She was afraid to eat because she was having delusions around that bad things would happen if she ate. And again, these are those like delusions of reference and the uncertainty about like where she ends and where the world begins. So she had heard Mr. Joyce talking in the past about infinitely shattering if we don't all come together. Or those are the words that she told me. And I don't know what that means, but at any rate, the infinitely shattering kind of got in her head, and she started to worry that if she ate food, she was shattering the food and that might hurt other people. So she wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping for the couple weeks leading up to December 8th. And we can survive quite a long time without food, but not sleeping will make anyone, even someone without a mental illness, like if you don't sleep for long enough, you will have some psychotic symptoms. So for her not to sleep when she was already psychotic was going to make everything even worse.
Okay. So it's your opinion that also kind of exacerbated the underlying mental health issues?
Yes, yeah, and exacerbated the frequency of the delusions got more and more consistent, and they also got more and more extreme. Like before it was like I felt like I had to die, and then it was command hallucinations of kill yourself, and then it was, oh, well, it's not just you, your daughter's a part of you because she got your breast milk, and so you both have to die. And so she was having these like command hallucinations that were getting worse and worse, that she was trying to resist.
What is a command hallucination?
A command hallucination is kind of what it sounds like. It's you hear a command telling you to do something. So because you can hear just voices, some people hallucinate voices that you can't even discern what they're saying. It's just like murmuring. You can hear, music, you can hear all kinds of things. A command hallucination is someone, like you're hearing orders being given to you.
And in this particular case, what were those command hallucinations?
To kill herself and to kill her daughter.
Did she describe the frequency of how much that was occurring?
I mean, she was saying, let me see, I don't want to put words in her mouth. She was saying like that they were getting worse and worse over time, and she felt like, I think she said like all the time, but I don't think that it was 24/7, but I think it was many times a day, like throughout the day. You know.
All right, and she reported to you, well, let's talk about some of these signs or delusions of reference.
Sure.
Can you tell us what Ms. Driver told you that she started associating with these command hallucinations or delusions?
Yeah, she said she started seeing signs telling her to kill herself and her daughter, telling her that she should grab a knife, telling her you need to die. Initially it was just you need to die, then it was you and Hannah need to die. And she reported anytime she saw a knife, she thought that was a sign. When people talked about death at all, she thought that was a sign that she was supposed to do that. So pretty neutral, innocuous things like cutlery on a kitchen countertop were interpreted as a sign. She heard news on the TV or a news show about a stabbing, and she felt like that was a sign that she needed to do it. And yeah, just all of these, pretty much, I think whatever would have happened around her, like her delusional mind was turning into signs for this to happen.
Did she express to you after the fact how these delusions made her feel, like, or what she needed, or how she was interpreting them aside from the actual action?
Yeah, they made her feel really anxious and scared. She didn't want to hurt herself or her baby. She was feeling forced, she said, and she was really anxious, and she really wanted help.
Do you recall her telling you anything about her attempts to get help?
Yes. She said she was frequently saying that she needed help. I'm losing my mind, I need help. One particular time, on more than one occasion, she said she was afraid she was going to hurt herself or Hannah, and that she needed help, and that she was ignored or given more CBD. And one time she said she held a knife to her baby's throat in front of Mr. Joyce and the two wives, and said something like, "Why shouldn't I do this? I'm afraid I'm going to do this," or tell me why this is bad. Tell me why this is wrong. And their response was, he restrained her and told her that he was going to take her to a psych ward, and she said, "Yes, please, take me to a psych ward." And he said no, because he's against government and medication, and so no further action was taken except to give her more CBD. So she wanted help. She was afraid that these delusions were getting stronger, and she was afraid that she wasn't safe.
Okay. So leading up to December the 8th, I know that you talked about her continuing to experience these command hallucinations. Do you recall kind of how these initial delusions and delusions by reference increased over time? Do you recall her talking to you about specific visual hallucinations or additional thoughts that she was having?
Well, she was saying that everything by the 7th and the 8th, everything was pointing to this needing to happen. And there were a lot of confusing delusions going on. There were command hallucinations about do this, you need to do this. There were delusional beliefs of I am sin, my daughter is sin, we need to die. There were delusions around that if that didn't happen, other people would suffer. So it wasn't just I'm bad, but that it would hurt other people. She experienced visual hallucinations. Like she said, she saw a bird cage over a woman's head. She said she saw a camera in the corner of her room that wasn't really there. And she just said she started to think, maybe she was evil, and everything she did was bad and evil. And her identity confusion was also part of this, where she identity diffusion is this psychological term. It's basically refers to like not having a strong sense of self. And with having a psychotic disorder and having borderline personality disorder, Chloe didn't have a strong sense of self. That's probably why she was vulnerable to being like taken in by Mr. Joyce in the first place. But now she's at an even worse point because she's been declining. Her mental health has been declining. She's really suicidal and psychotic. And I think it was even more confusing for her to know like where she ended and where the other people or the world began. So her idea of killing herself and killing her daughter, in her lucid moments, she saw that it was something she didn't want to do. She was scared it would happen, and really like was afraid of it. But in her delusional moments, it seemed like because there wasn't a clear sense of like where she and her baby ended and where the world began, that it wasn't as it was something she needed to do that was like a good thing to do, that was like the right thing to do.
Okay.
She was very confused.
Okay. And you've previously told us that, this might not have been something that she experienced 24/7, but there's really no way to gauge the amount of time, frequency, or anything like that, correct?
There's no way to gauge it, and typically symptoms aren't like constant. And there are, I say typically, but it's hard for me even to think of people who are psychotic who I've been around, which is a lot of people, who don't have little moments of clarity or who are incapable of, goal-directed behavior. So someone might be really psychotic, but they could still, in her case, like change a diaper or, drive a car. That's not relevant to her, but I was thinking of someone else. That people can still do things and still be really psychotic.
Okay. What did she specifically tell you about December the 8th and what those delusions continued to be?
She said she was continuing to have delusions around hurting her baby and herself or killing her baby and herself, and that she was looking for reasons not to do it, but everything she saw, she interpreted it as a reason it had to happen. She thought that knives being left out was a message that it needed to happen, so she brought a knife to the room because she thought that it needed to happen. She said she believed she needed to pay for sins that she'd committed. She believed that she was, that anything that she was guilty of, she passed on to her daughter through breastfeeding. And she said that she told me she had no more will to resist after weeks of resisting.
So she it's based on what she reported to you, she was continuing to kind of have those delusions of reference that were pointing her.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
Wait, let's talk about what she told you about when you asked her the question about her behavior that day. Do you recall what she said?
She said as soon as it happened, she regretted it, which didn't surprise me. Even as she was telling the story, she was crying a lot, and this was only a few months after it happened, and she was crying a lot and telling the story, and it also didn't surprise me because leading up to it, sometimes she thought this was something that needed to happen, and sometimes she thought, no, this is wrong. And she was so confused that she was kind of going in and out. And so after it happened, it didn't surprise me that she also at that point thought that it shouldn't have happened.
Is it also fair to say that that could be after having some time to reflect on everything and now being medicated, that's how she might interpret that?
It's possible, yeah.
Okay. And let's talk about, she told you about locking the door and everything else. Can you kind of explain to us how that fits into this kind of in and out sense of what she was experiencing, the confusion?
Yeah. She felt that this needed to happen and that all the signs had pointed to it needing to happen. And so when she was she had stabbed her daughter, and let's see, I don't remember if someone was knocking on the door or someone was coming, but she locked the door because she hadn't killed herself yet. So she locked the door in order to stab herself more, to make sure that she killed herself.
Okay, so by what she reported to you at that time is that her memory was that she had already stabbed herself and the child prior to locking that door?
Yes.
Okay. And can you kind of explain this in the context of, that thought process and how it fits into her following this command hallucination?
Yeah, well, like I've said, she'd been confused because in moments of clarity, she knew that she didn't want to do this and she was scared. In moments of delusions are beliefs, right? They're false beliefs. So when you're under the impression of a delusion, you believe it to be true. So she believed that this needed to happen, and so she locked the door to help it happen.
Okay. Do you know, or do you recall whether or not she had any continued suicidal ideation after she was arrested or released from the hospital?
She did continue, yes. And she reported it, but it's also really documented in the jail records and everything that she continued to feel suicidal. She'd been on suicide watch at least once, but in and out of medical in jail too. Medication had helped some, but she continues to struggle with that.
Okay. And at least those collateral sources is what I'll call them. They also kind of continue to suggest. Did they continue to suggest that she was still having these kind of delusional thought processes?
Yes. In fact, the detective records from interviewing her when she was in the hospital reflect that she was kind of in and out of. She was still psychotic, and she would kind of lapse into. I don't know if she was catatonic or if she was just sort of lapsing into, being non-responsive. And so, yeah, there were clear signs that she was psychotic in the hospital, and in the jail records, when she was admitted, show that she was having delusions and psychotic symptoms, yeah.
Do you recall if those records kind of indicated that she still had those same delusions about the need to kill herself or believing that she was part of sin, if that was still the continued? Do you recall?
I don't recall. I know that she was suicidal. I don't recall the exact nature of the delusions, or even if they were written down in the jail records. I don't recall if it just said that she was delusional or if it said what her delusions were.
What she was communicating.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. So part of your evaluation included kind of making some sort of diagnostic impression based on the information you had, correct?
Yes.
All right. And what were you able to essentially diagnose her with based on all of the things that you reviewed in this particular case?
I diagnosed her with schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, and also with borderline personality disorder.
Can you tell us what exactly schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type is? What kind of symptoms and how it manifests?
Sure. Schizoaffective bipolar type is basically schizophrenia plus bipolar disorder. It can be diagnosed when someone has the symptoms of schizophrenia, but then they also have the mood disorder part of cyclical mood between mania and depression. The schizophrenic symptoms are hallucinations, delusions, and then the bipolar part is the mood swings and depression or mania, or both.
What were you also, you talked about borderline personality disorder. What all does that entail?
Borderline personality disorder is more of like a lifelong personality, like a personality disorder. And it's characterized by problems managing and regulating emotions and behavior. Like I talked about before, problems like feeling a stable sense of self. Relationships tend to be unstable. There tend to be rapid changes in like one's own self-image and self-identity. There can be periods of stress-related psychosis, like loss of contact with reality. And there are often risky, impulsive behavior. There's often suicide attempts or threats. And yeah, it's...
What happens typically, or what can happen with people that are diagnosed with both of these particular illnesses if they remain untreated?
Particularly with the schizoaffective with bipolar type, remaining untreated is just not advisable.
Okay.
I mean, there's no cure for it, but the way to manage it is through first off, like your first line of defense is medication. Having therapy and a good support system and all those other things, those are really important too, but without the medication, it's just going to be a real struggle for someone to stay in touch with reality.
Does having these two things exist at the same time, can that lead to any like heightened psychotic symptoms or hallucinations, or if stress is involved, can that make it more severe?
Stress can make it worse. Psychotic symptoms from schizoaffective disorder in the midst of a manic episode are like, a perfect storm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you think of any type of example that could articulate that?
Besides this case.
Besides this case, okay, that's fair. All right, let's talk about. So you were able to make those determinations regarding her diagnoses. I know that you and I have talked previously about kind of positive symptom and negative symptoms about those particular disorders. Can you tell the jury what that particularly would mean?
Yeah. This is with regards to schizoaffective disorder. In schizophrenic disorders, their symptoms called positive symptoms and symptoms called negative symptoms. And it doesn't mean positive or good and negative or bad. The positive symptoms mean something's there that shouldn't be there. And those are the things like having hallucination, like seeing things that aren't there, hearing things that aren't there. Those are positive symptoms because it's the presence of something abnormal that shouldn't be there. Negative symptoms, I haven't talked about as much with Ms. Driver, but those are the lack of like expressed emotion. Someone with schizophrenia, a lot of times, there's a deficit of like words or speech. There's a deficit of how expressive their face is. So they might say something really happy or really sad, but kind of with a straight face. It's an absence of expressed emotion or an absence of words. And I didn't witness it with her because she just wasn't in that. She was a little bit more hypomanic when I saw her, but I read in records periods of time when, as I was reading it, it made sense of like, that is like indicative of a schizophrenic disorder where she is not talking or not moving or not showing any expression. Like that's just really consistent with, those are negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Yeah.
Okay. One of the other things I think you, aside from, taking your DSM and evaluating all of this, all of her potential symptoms in this case, what was another thing that you consider to be a crucial factor in determining what her level of functioning was?
It was the environment she was living in. If she had been struggling with these mental health symptoms, not in a cult, it wouldn't have been so destabilizing. The relationship with Mr. Joyce is really clearly like a called coercive controlling relationship, where someone uses a pattern of controlling behaviors to create a really unequal playing field in the relationship. And it makes it very difficult for someone to leave because they become dependent on that person. They might confuse whether, like, the abuse. They might be waiting for the rewarding parts of the relationship. And her relationship with him was characterized by such an extreme level of coercive control, to the extent that, she was isolated, she was indoctrinated into a belief system. And I understand that, like, religious beliefs, that's one thing, but a belief system that you deserve to get hit, you deserve to get put in a dark place for days or weeks, like, that's abuse. That's abusive. So there's this coercive control relationship between them. And then it wasn't just a relationship between them, it was basically he was functioning as a cult leader. And, impinging on the individual freedom of action of the members. In a cult, there aren't just members, there's members and there's a leader. And it's not a level playing field. So she, as her mental health deteriorated, she didn't get the help she needed. She got more abuse. She got reinforced in her delusions. She just,
What effect do you think in this particular case the extreme level of that mind control and coercive control played on Ms. Driver?
Mind control is like a psychological term that talks about, to explain like how cult leaders exist, where someone will attempt to distort someone's perception of the world and it's not like a magical or mystical process. It's actually just a set of pretty well understood psychological processes for controlling people and manipulating them. It usually involves like putting them in a place where they're isolated, where they have to conform, where they have to comply, where they have to identify with the group in order to get their needs met. So that was that and the context of being in a cult and the context of being in a relationship with a controlling, coercive person was just a combination of extreme mental and behavioral manipulation.
So just to be clear, so the delusions that Ms. Driver was suffering from in the days leading up to December 8th, those weren't just delusions based on these ideological or religious beliefs, correct?
Right. In fact, the delusions she was having that she was so scared of weren't anything that she was taught in this group. They were delusions. Yeah, they were just delusions that she was having.
Okay. And with respect to Ms. Driver specifically, like what overall life circumstances about her did you feel kind of made her even more vulnerable to what was going on? With the mind control and everything else.
Yeah. Usually people who end up joining a cult have some kind of hunger for knowledge and guidance and leadership, and also hunger for like an ideology and for help defining their identity. It's often people who are in late adolescence and they're just struggling. That's when like we form our identities, or at least one of the formative times for our identity is late adolescence, and that is a really common age for people to join cults. So she was vulnerable in those ways before she even met him.
And how does that vulnerability play into those pre-existing mental health things that were already going on?
She already was having mental health issues. She already had trouble regulating her feelings. She had trouble with reality testing and having psychotic symptoms. And then in the cult, they became even more impaired. And they weren't, instead of getting help with it, she was, like I said, they were reinforced or they were ignored.
What were some of those things that kind of compounded all of that specifically related to Ms. Driver?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to her own mental health struggles, she, because of this group and because of him, she was dealing with extreme isolation, emotional and physical abuse. Her mental health and medical care were withheld. Her food and sleep in the weeks leading up to December 8th were affected. And then the involuntary administration of CBD instead of actual mental health treatment.
All right, so in this particular case, leading up to December 8th, after you reviewed all of these materials and everything, were you able to ascertain whether or not you believe that she was in the throes of this kind of psychotic episode and command hallucinations?
Judge, I'm going to renew my objection under 704.
I said in the events leading up to.
No objection to that.
All right. You can answer the question.
Okay, can you repeat it? Sorry.
Sure. In the events leading up to December 8th, based on everything that you reviewed, were you able to make a determination as to what kind of episode Ms. Driver was experiencing at that particular time.
Yes, not just based on my interview with her, but based on reviewing all of the different sources of information. I'm confident that she was in the throes of a very severe psychotic episode in the days leading up to December 8th.
Okay, and that's based on all the things you were just telling us about the delusions, the command hallucinations, the delusions by reference?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Lack of sleep, all of that combined?
Yes, she was just incredibly delusional and confused.
Okay. And all of we've talked about several types of delusions, but all of these delusions kind of centered around the idea that she needed to kill herself.
Yes.
Okay. And I think you were talking about her kind of inability based on that time frame to distinguish where she ended and someone else began.
Right.
Okay. And that kind of applied to all the things around her, correct?
Right. Yeah, she struggled with, like I said, that her identity and knowing where she ended and where the rest of the world began.
And I think you talked about the specific, that she kind of associated, or one of those delusions included her associating breastfeeding with Hannah.
Right. Yeah. Her identity and figuring out where she ended and other people began was long-standing and something she struggled with even before she was a mother. But being bonded with her daughter made that an even more kind of ripe relationship for her to be confused about where she ended and where her daughter began, particularly like breastfeeding, because there's just this little grain of truth that they're sharing something, and that her delusions could kind of pick up and run away with, that then they were, one or blended. Yeah, it's identity, like fusion is the term.
And I think you were talking about that kind of, it based on all of the resources that you had available to you, you believe that created those periods of confusion, correct?
Right.
All right. Let's talk about, after you reviewed everything, you have no reason to believe that she didn't suffer from these symptoms leading up to December 8th, correct?
Correct.
And that's not just based on Ms. Driver's self-report, correct?
Absolutely.
There were other things that you considered, including things that had been given to you through the state of Georgia, correct?
Right.
All right. Let's talk about, you ended up issuing an amended report in this case, correct?
Yes.
All right. And do you recall the date of that amended report?
Let me look. It's not so much an amended report as an amendment to the report, where I wanted to replace one paragraph with another paragraph. It's dated May 4th of 2022.
Okay.
So almost a year after my first report.
Okay. So you had written your first report, and in that first report you included, just like other practitioners do, that, you can revise, add to.
Right. At the end of every report, there's this paragraph that's at the end of, it's just a cut and paste thing. It says that the opinions expressed in this report are subject to modification if I get additional information, or I reserve the right to express additional opinions that I believe are consistent if I decide it's appropriate. So it's this disclaimer that this report is everything that I know up to this point, but I reserve the right to change it if something happens. Yeah.
And
So.
Can you give us some examples of some things that might happen along the way to cause you to reconsider, the findings that you might have made in an earlier report?
Yeah. In some cases, it's that new records become available, that when I read them, it changes some important aspect of my opinion, it would change my conclusions. That wasn't the case here. What happened here is I finished the report and I was just kind of going about my business, but part of my business is I talk a lot about not guilty by reason of insanity with other forensic psychologists, like in consultation and stuff, and get continuing education about it. So what happened was a development in my thinking around not guilty by reason of insanity that I wanted to not reverse anything, but like tweak something.
Okay. And at any point in time prior to you issuing that report, did any member of Chloe's family or contact you and ask you to make that modification?
No.
Did anybody from my office or Mr. Kessler's office ever ask you to make any type of amendments to your report?
No, it was super out of the blue. I think I emailed you one day and was like, I need to write a little paragraph that I want to add.
Okay. Are you aware of what the dates of the other evaluations were in this particular case?
I don't remember, but they were 2023 and 2024. I don't know.
That's okay. But you're confident, and what's reflected on that amended report was that yours was done May the 4th of 2022.
Yes.
Okay. So we've heard previous testimony from Dr. Garrett that hers were done after you had done that amendment, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. With respect to that amendment, you wanted to describe the idea of confusion, or how that, how she resisted those delusions, correct?
Right.
Okay. And you were able, upon your reflection and everything else and totality of circumstances, you believe that there was some degree of confusion in her thought process in the days leading up to this event?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's talk about a couple of things that I assume that the state's going to try to talk to you about, so we'll talk about it first, okay?
Can I
All
not
right,
talk about the amendment anymore? Or what it was?
Well, we might come back to
Sorry,
that.
okay.
Okay, so you talked about, in this particular case, the idea about we talked about going to the kitchen and getting a knife, and to the common observer, that might appear to be something that might have been done in kind of a deliberate or planned manner. Can you explain in this particular case how you perceive, based on your evidence that you've reviewed, her delusion played into that particular action?
Yeah. She'd been experiencing these signs for weeks, and the more time went on, the more signs she saw that this needed to happen. So I think, I don't remember exactly how you phrased the question. Sorry.
No, can you just kind of explain from a psychological perspective how somebody in the throes of that particular type of command, hallucination, or delusion, how that differs, or how that action differs from somebody that might have, had a rational thought process or deliberate intent?
Judge, I have an objection. If she's going to opine at the time and talk about delusion, that's improper under 704, so I object to that. She just wants to say in general, not the defendant in particular. I don't object to that, but she cannot give an opinion at the time regarding any delusion or the acts from a delusion.
It's an act prior to the event that the state has raised.
All right, make that clear in your questions.
Yes, ma'am. The act, you're familiar with the facts of this case,
Yes.
correct? And one of those facts includes the assertion that at some point after Ms. Driver went up to this bedroom, she left that room and went and got a knife.
Oh,
And Judge, that's my objection, because she's asking about a specific act at the time, not prior to it, so she's coalescing two different things. I object under 704.
All right, well, we have got to recess at this time and take our lunch recess now. So that objection is sustained.
All right, Dr. Ballard, before we broke for lunch, I think we were talking about stuff related to the knife in this particular case. Is it common for people in a delusional state to commit acts that people do every day?
Yes.
Okay. Can you give some examples of what that might be?
Like I was talking about earlier, someone can be in a delusional state but still change a diaper or drive a car. Yeah.
What about the breastfeeding?
Oh, yeah, breastfeed the baby.
What about walking downstairs and getting a knife?
Yeah, I mean, that's how people act out their delusional compulsions, is that they do things.
Okay. And that could be the same way about locking a door as well?
Right.
Okay.
If it's part of a delusional compulsion,
Okay.
they do it. Yeah.
All right. We've heard some evidence in this case about some Google searches and related to the time frame involved in this case. Can you explain the idea of well, we know that there were different types of searches. You're familiar with those, correct?
Right.
And then I provided those searches, internet searches to you, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you've had an opportunity to review those, correct?
Yes.
All right. Can you tell me what, in your opinion, is what kind of information you can generate from those type of searches in terms of what kind of state of mind that Ms. Driver was in at the in the time leading up to these events?
I mean, we can try to infer, like the searches about bus tickets. I would infer that she was trying to escape. The searches, you need to refresh my memory, sorry, about.
Well, we know that she searched for like items like schizophrenia, how to snap a neck,
Right.
mental institutions,
Okay,
you know, those kind of things. Are you able to make any determination as to what was in her state of mind at the time of the crime based on those previous searches?
No.
Okay. Are any of those searches necessarily indicative of anything related to what was in her mind at the time of the crime?
No.
Okay. And in your opinion, are those searches indicative, the back and forth of those type of searches, what in your mind does that highlight to you in terms of her delusion and the compulsion?
Really, all I took from those searches was it was another piece of information confirming that she was kind of in and out of being delusional and then not being delusional, or at least believing the delusions and trying to resist the delusions. And when she was trying to resist the delusions, she was searching for a psychiatric hospital because she wanted help, or searching for a bus ticket because she wanted to get away. And when she was more believing the delusions, she would search for, well, how to snap a neck. I don't even know if who that refers to, but other things that she did, like get a knife, would be like when she was believing her delusions.
We know that Ms. Driver made several statements to law enforcement and to treating personnel at the Kennestone Hospital after the alleged incident. Some of those statements include, how long is my prison sentence, and discussions about her just wanting to be with Mr. Ben Michael with her child. Are any of those statements indicative one way or another as it pertains to her state of mind at the time of the crime?
No, this was after the fact, when she was in the hospital, still psychotic on pain meds, knowing she had just killed her daughter, feeling suicidal. Also, the statement about just wanting to be with him and their daughter was like one phrase in a whole long statement, and when you put it in the context, like that was not the whole point of that whole statement. She was talking about being abused and things were better when there was a smaller group, and yeah, so.
But based on that, from a psychological perspective, you can't make any determinations as to what was in her mind at the time of the crime based on statements she made after the fact.
No, I think if anything, it again shows that her state of mind was fluctuating, and I think it's misguided to presume that anything she said a day later or several days later or something is stable, and that she was always thinking that way. She was all over the map.
And I believe it was your testimony today that based on the information you received, including jail records and collateral resources, that those delusions continued months after the offense in this case, correct?
Yeah, she was still having delusions when I met with her.
We've also heard testimony in this case about hundreds of phone calls to Mr. Benmichael after she was incarcerated. Can you tell us well, first you reviewed some of those phone calls, correct?
I did, not all of them. There were too many, but it's several
Correct.
of them.
And how do you explain, from a psychological standpoint, this continued contact in the nature with respect to Chloe Driver?
I explained it in the context that we talked about earlier about trauma bonding, about a cycle of abuse, feeling very connected to him. She'd been with him since she was 17. She had a baby with him. Also, she'd been very controlled by him, so she was used to submitting to him. So it would have been more surprising if she had just, poof, not wanted anything to do with him. That seems like, to someone who's not connected to someone that way, it seems like a no-brainer that she should have just wanted to run as far away from him as possible. But when you're in an abusive relationship like that, it often takes many attempts to get away.
Okay. And what were some of the concerns that you had with respect to the nature of the relationship based on the calls that you listened to?
How extremely controlling he was one concern. For example,
Objection hearsay.
We've already stipulated to the foundation of the jail calls.
Still hearsay, Your Honor.
I don't know where you're going with this. Y'all obviously know.
I think she's about to say what someone else who's not here to testify said on a phone call. She can't offer her statement because it's party opponent mission rule under 802.
These statements are go directly to the state of mind. The state's arguing that these continued contact is a way to counter any defense that we may have in this particular state. And they factored into Dr. Ballard's analysis of this particular relationship in formulating her opinion.
I don't object to the defendant's statement, but not the other person's statement.
What was?
All right. I'm sorry?
It goes to our client's state of mind in terms of how those statements affected her.
All right. I'm going to ask that y'all return to the jury room for a few minutes while we take up a matter that we cannot take up in your presence. There are, obviously, there's been testimony about the number of phone calls that Ms. Driver had with Mr. Benmichael. Are we talking about the substance of those calls now? Is that where we're going?
Yes, Your Honor.
Are we talking about any other calls to any other individual?
No.
And Judge, Ms. Trustway told me which one she's going. I don't object to those particulars as long as she doesn't go into great detail.
I think it will be limited in what he is saying. The point of the question is to affect, basically is to be what he is telling her to do and how she is responding to that during those jail phone calls. Particularly, just to bring us back to a topic we had last week, he tells her about drinking her own urine in the jail, and for which he ultimately gets her to say that she will do it. Things like that he is telling her to do in those jail calls that she is responding to. It goes to the level of his control over her while she's still in the jail.
Additionally, making her refer to him as daddy and acknowledge in those phone calls in response to things he requests that she do, that I do, daddy, I do.
Okay. Let me understand the state's position. Mr. Fogus, you said you didn't have an objection to either of those two?
As long as it's those two and not other calls, no objection, Your Honor.
Okay, well, I wasn't done yet.
I apologize.
It's okay. The context of the calls where he's directing her to make phone calls to other individuals to ask to obtain the money that is in question.
I'm sorry. I
That's
apologize.
okay.
Question about the money.
About the money.
The money back.
Benyamin directing her to contact her parents.
Don't object.
Okay. And
Just as long as we're not going down in more detail than just that topic.
Yeah.
Okay, no objection.
one more.
Okay.
Him directing Chloe to be clear about not adopting or accepting any angle or strategy that involves the idea that I was manipulating you. He was talking about Chloe's defense.
Say that again?
He directed Chloe to be clear that she was not adopting or accepting any angle or strategy in this case that involves the idea that I was manipulating you. You're not going that route. Be simpler and clearer and tell them it was ideas terrorizing your brain caused a psychotic break.
No objection, Judge. It's just these topics we're talking about.
Yes,
Those
that.
4 topics, you're not introducing the calls.
No.
You're just asking this witness about them. They were provided to her as a basis for her,
Evaluate in
some
her, yes.
part of her evaluation. All right. Anything else before we bring the jury back in?
No, Judge.
All right, let's bring him in.
All right, Dr. Ballard, before we took that brief break, we were talking about part of your review in this case involved you reviewing and listening to several phone calls, correct?
Yes.
All right. In this case, we already know that there were hundreds of phone calls, and I think you indicated you have not listened to all of them, correct?
Right.
All right, but can you talk about and tell the jury about some of the content of the calls that you listened to and what your concerns were related to those?
Sure. One of the calls I listened to, the content was he was instructing, she was in jail, and he was instructing her to drink her own urine while she was in jail. And that if she felt embarrassed to do this in front of her cellmate, that she should tell her cellmate that her naturopathic doctor told her she needs to drink it or else she'll get sick. And he was saying things like, you need to do this, you can't fight me on this, you need to do this, do you understand? And she was resistant, and when he was resistant, he said, I was expecting the answer, I do, Daddy, I do. And they kind of went back and forth until she finally said, I do, Daddy, and he said, that's better, or good job, or something like that. And to me, this just reflects how controlling he was and the amount of control he had over her. And
Go ahead.
and the idea that the only acceptable answer is to completely agree with whatever it is he's saying.
Okay. And there were also discussions about money, correct?
Yeah, he told her also to get, it was a big sum, $60,000 from a loan he'd made her take out, that she needed to tell her parents to give him that money. And she said, what are you going to use the money for? And he said, why are you questioning me? And she said, because I can know what you want to do with my money. And he said, no. He said, why are you asking me that question? Are you doubting me? She said, I'm starting to doubt you because this, was a few months into jail. And he went on a long tirade that I didn't document in full, but basically he called her dumb, told her not to talk to her mom anymore, said every time you talk to your mom you get pear-shaped and stupid. She at one point tried to interrupt and said, and he said, no, there's nothing else, it's you need to change.
Okay. And there were several more phone calls that you listened to regarding that.
Yeah, at one point he told her, it's a little ironic because he told her that under no circumstances was she to represent him as being controlling or manipulative to anyone. They were talking about her defense, and I don't remember his exact words, and I didn't put them in my report, but it was basically you will not, represent me that way. You will not do that. And it's him controlling her to say that he's not controlling. Yeah.
You would agree with me based on some of the other phone calls that you listened to that that he was also kind and sweet to her and that kind of thing.
Yeah, even in these same phone calls, when she was completely agreeing with him, she would get very reinforced for that. Or sometimes a phone call would start out just kind of like any relationship, hi sweetie, I miss you, how are you? But the second that she would not be 100% compliant, then there'd be pressure and control until she was compliant again. And then once she was compliant again, he would say really like warm, nice things, or if she'd share something, he'd say, oh, that really makes me happy that you got to, like she shared a book she read, and so that makes you really happy that you enjoyed that book. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. Yeah, he knew how to be kind.
Okay. Did you find it, were you surprised that after she was incarcerated that she continued this contact with him?
No, it's pretty typical in an abusive relationship and in a cult, and so certainly in both, that it's not just a quick separation, that there's a continued connection.
Okay. And you'd agree with me that a jail is not a therapeutic environment, correct?
It is not.
Okay. And that, to the best of your knowledge, the only thing that Ms. Driver was receiving during her incarceration was medication, correct?
Medication, and what they call counseling is like short, every few weeks, short little visits, pretty much basically to make sure people are suicidal. So it's not the kind of counseling that will bring about like therapeutic change. It's just to, like, you know,
And based on your
see who
profession,
needs to go to, sorry,
no, that's okay.
to
Go
see
ahead.
if anyone needs to go to Suicide Watch.
Okay. Based on your professional experience, it didn't surprise you one way or another that she was still communicating with Mr. Ben Michael.
No.
All right. And that you would agree with me that just strictly putting her on medication and not providing the additional therapy or anything else is part of the reason why this continued?
I think so, yeah. In my professional opinion, she would need a lot more treatment to get past this relationship.
So just removing the physical nature of that relationship doesn't necessarily break that bond, is what I'm hearing.
Right.
Okay. Based on your interviews with Chloe and any of your collateral sources, was it clear to you that Chloe loved her child?
Yes.
Okay. Did she express to you that she never wanted to hurt her child?
Yes.
Okay. And that was also kind of corroborated by the additional information that you had to consider in this particular case, correct?
Yes, there wasn't any information that suggested that she ever wanted to hurt her child.
Okay. And you also had the opportunity to watch Dr. Garrett's testimony, correct?
I did.
You had also been given both of her reports that she had done subsequent to yours, correct?
Yes.
All right. You essentially would agree with me that both of you diagnosed her with the same type of disorders, correct?
We did.
Okay, minus the cannabis use one.
Right.
Okay. And, you know, you would agree with her when she said that there's, you know, the difference between crazy, mentally ill, and insane, correct?
Right.
All right. Is there anything about Dr. Garrett's reports that you take issue with?
We were pretty much on the same page that Ms. Driver was severely mentally ill and delusional. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about delusions, okay? Going back to that briefly. You've told us that a delusion is a fixed false belief.
Yeah.
Okay, and that it is a fixed false belief that is just not true.
It's not true, and yet someone believes it is true the way that I believe I'm sitting here right now. Yeah.
Okay. And the delusional compulsion is when someone acts upon that false belief, correct?
Right.
Okay. And when someone is acting upon that delusion or false belief, is it because they believe it to be true?
Yes.
Okay. Are they acting on that delusional belief because it is the right thing to do in their mind?
Yeah, in their mind, it's true the same way that I believe it's true that when you ask me a question, I should answer it here, and you guys will hear what I say. Like that, it's that. So that's the right thing for me to do right now, and so I'm doing it. That's acting on a delusional compulsion. It's just doing what you perceive to be true and right.
So the person acting under delusion believes in their mind that that false thing not only is true, but it's the right thing to do in their mind.
Right.
Okay. is it, if someone believes that this false idea or delusion is true, is it possible that they may not understand that that's right or wrong?
Not just possible, but that's kind of the nature of a delusion, is that they believe it to be true. So if I believe it to be true and right, I don't think it's wrong.
Okay.
If my delusion clears up later, I might see it differently. But in the throes of the delusion, which is the belief, I believe it to be right. Yeah.
In this particular case, you have testified, along with Dr. Garrett, that Ms. Driver suffered from these delusions not only in her adolescence, but that they were present in the time leading up to December the 8th of 2020, correct?
Correct.
All right, and you'd agree with me that those delusions, by her report and what the resources that you reviewed, indicated that those delusions got worse.
Yes.
Okay.
Particularly the fall of 2020.
Okay,
Yeah.
and what was the lack of medication and treatment over time what kind of exacerbated those delusions, those thoughts and those compulsions?
I mean, part of it is lack of treatment. Treatment would have helped. Part of it was she was living in a really stressful, abusive environment. That would make her mental health decline.
Okay. And, you know, over time, based on your review of all the materials, it became clear to you that she resisted those delusions, correct?
Right.
And those compulsions?
Yes, she was scared of them and was afraid that she wouldn't be able to differentiate them from reality unless she got help. So she was trying to get help because she was really afraid about these thoughts she was having that sometimes she believed were true.